During the life of the Sega Saturn, Capcom was one of its most fiercely supportive third parties. They released over 30 software titles for the platform, many of which are often on top 10 lists. When the Sega Dreamcast showed up, it was evident that Capcom once again intended to develop heavily for Sega's console, adopting both it and its arcade equivalent, the Naomi, for many of its new games. Over the course of the life of the Dreamcast, Capcom published 40 games, the most in its history for a Sega platform. These titles included shoot-'em-ups, fighting games, adventure games, and even RPGs. Unlike the Saturn, many of these actually made their way west for the North American and European markets. In this episode, we will be looking at the games Capcom blessed the Dreamcast with, and I'll share some opinions about how they turned out. I hope you guys enjoy Capcom and the Sega Dreamcast Part 1. In February of 1999, Capcom released its very first Dreamcast game, Power Stone. Released right alongside its arcade Naomi version, this 3D arena fighter sought to take everything you knew about fighting games and turn it on its head. It features full 3D movement, and you can use items in the environment to attack your opponents. Within each stage, you can also find gems called Power Stones, and when you have all three, you become a super-powered killing machine that can throw screen-filling supers to really lay the beat down. I loved this when it came out because it was so incredibly different. Fighting games at that point, even the polygon ones, remained locked primarily to a 2D playfield. Some let you sidestep and roll a bit, but rarely had you seen a fighting game actually allow you to traverse the playfield like this, at this speed, with this level of playability. It also looked great for an early game in the system's life, and ran super smooth as well. It wasn't overly deep, and its sequel bested it pretty much in every category, but in early 1999, it was a must-own gem with a fantastic level of playability. In March of 1999, Capcom kept the Dreamcast love going with the nearly arcade-perfect port of Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes. This was originally done on the CPS2, so the Dreamcast had absolutely no issue whatsoever giving us the same great animation from the arcade. The only shortcoming here are the load times, and even they are only a slight speed bump in an otherwise stellar presentation. Building off their success with X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, Capcom decided to expand the roster to include characters not yet seen in the Versus series. Here we get favorites like Strider, Mega Man, Venom, Morrigan, and War Machine, and even more when you factor in the third special partner, which includes 20 more characters in the fight. Once again, it's 2 vs. 2, and plays pretty much just like the games on which it's based. And man, does it look and sound good. Just soak in those beautifully animated sprites and backgrounds. They age like fine wine, and this one has the gameplay to match it. Its sequel added a lot more, but mad respect goes out to this one as the last true 2D entry in the series.
Combo finish! KO! Mega Man win!
Just a few months later, in July of 1999, Capcom released Street Fighter 03, also known as Alpha 3, for the Dreamcast. This was another CPS2 arcade port that the Dreamcast did with absolute ease. It has loads more characters than the previous entry, as well as a ton of different gameplay modes, including World Tour, Arcade versus Final Battle, and Dramatic Battle options. So much gameplay is wrapped up in this game it could be played for months with just what's on the disc. There's even a version of it in Japan with an online versus mode. Like Marvel vs. Capcom, the Dreamcast does a bang-up job here recreating the original material. The animation again just screams arcade perfect, and unlike the Saturn port, even retains the proper resolution and screen aspect. I'm a big fan of this game and its content, and you'll struggle to find a better port of it anywhere else. Its roster, gameplay modes, and visual and audio appeal make it a must-own. In November of 1999, Capcom published Giga Wing, a vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up that was developed by Takumi Corporation. This was another CPS2 arcade port to the Dreamcast, and another one that turned out visually accurate. This has all the staples of the genre you know: multiple ship options with different types of firepower, screen-filling nuke attacks, as well as a shield power-up that reflects enemies' attacks back at them. I really enjoyed this game, but it has some problems that really hamper the fun factor as the festivities progress. Like a few other shoot-'em-ups of the era, it likes to fill the screen up with bonus icons. And when I say fill it up, I mean these things are everywhere. They will often hide enemy attacks, and when the screen is really cluttered, I can't even tell where the hell my ship is sometimes. This makes for some irritating deaths, and as the difficulty ratchets up, it just gets worse. Otherwise, it runs well and is nice and colorful, but it just lacks the overall fun factor of the better games in the genre. I do recommend that you give it a go if you like shooters, but there are better options on the platform. November of 1999 also saw JoJo's Bizarre Adventure released. The title actually belies the fact that this is two games in one, a compilation of both JoJo's Venture and its upgrade JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, both original CPS3 arcade games. They are based on the story and characters of the Japanese comic of the same name. In the realm of Capcom weirdness, this one takes home the crown. I don't know much about the source material, but the story here is just full of crazy characters and motivations. The interface differs a bit from your normal Street Fighter knockoff as well. Here you have 3 attack buttons and a 4th one called Stand, which actively changes your moveset to more powerful attacks. You do get some radical special moves and combos here, and the animation and visual detail is pretty stunning. It takes quite a bit to acclimate your base Street Fighter skills to this, but once you get a flow going and find a likable character, this can be extremely fun. The presentation reminds me of the Vampire series a bit, and since we didn't get a part 4 of that, this is as close as we are going to get. Like a few other Capcom fighting games, this saw a re-release in Japan that added competitive network play. In December of 1999, Capcom released Star Gladiator 2, Nightmare of Bilstein for the Dreamcast. This was called Plasma Sword in the West, and is a direct sequel to the PlayStation-powered Star Gladiator. Both games were done on the ZN2, which has powered many of Capcom's early 3D arcade games. I remember some of the reviews just tearing this apart back then, calling it one of the worst fighting games on the system. I think they are crazy because this game is actually pretty damn solid. The story has the bad guy from part 1 coming back, and there are a pile of new characters here. The gameplay is notably different in a few areas, and now plays a bit more like Street Fighter with new super combo powers called Plasma Strikes. The graphics, while certainly not the best on the Dreamcast, do have a certain charm, and I like the way the playfield fades in and out and the screen-filling special attacks. Many of these characters play similar to one another, but there is still impressive variety here with loads of movesets and specials. I'd admit that it's bigger on flash than depth, but who cares as long as it's fun? And Plasma Sword here is certainly that. Also in December of 1999, Capcom released the much-anticipated sequel, Street Fighter III Double Impact. Available for the first time at home, this compilation includes both the original Street Fighter III as well as its upgrade Street Fighter III Second Impact. These were originally on the CPS-3 arcade board, and the ports here are very solid for their time. I had expected this to show up on the Saturn initially, particularly since the original arcade game was released in early 1997. Once the rumors started of the Saturn being replaced, any chance of that was lost, and so here we are having a discussion about the Dreamcast version. Having both these games in one package really gives a ton of replay value here. There are enough changes between the two versions to justify spending time with both of them. This home release also sees playable versions of Gil and Shin Akuma, and you just gotta love that animation. I mean, what was here was a powerful reminder of just how good 2D animation could be in a brand new 3D polygon world. If I had to level a criticism to the game, it's the difficulty of Gil. This dude is the cheapest character in Street Fighter history. I mean, not only is he crazy hard to begin with, but he also regenerates life, which is just the worst damn way to add challenge ever. Outside of that nitpick, this is a great package of fighters, and one that definitely had to be owned at its release. Capcom's last game of 1999 came late in December and was a port of the PC version of Resident Evil 2. This version would get some major upgrades over the PlayStation original, including higher resolution characters and items, faster load times, and higher quality full motion video sequences. The end result is perhaps the best console version of this game, a game that was already excellent to begin with. Claire and Leon arrive in Raccoon City and have their entire lives turned upside down by the evil Umbrella Corporation. A virus is loose in the streets, turning everyone into bloodthirsty killing machines, and it's up to you to survive. Like the first game, you will need to explore, solve puzzles, kill monsters, and find out what the hell is really going on. It's bigger, has more bad guys, more twists and turns, and 4 separate scenarios for our 2 heroes. It's the best of campy horror, both serious and ridiculous at the same time, a feat not easily pulled off in movies, and even more so in video games. I really wish that Capcom had the foresight to keep the original, full-color 3D renderings of the backdrops here. The original low-resolution, low-color assets from the PlayStation really needed an upgrade. Even so, this is still an A+ experience, and the Dreamcast did it all kinds of justice. Capcom rang in the new year with the January 2000 release of Tech Romancer. This is a 3D mech fighting game that was originally a ZN2 arcade release. Did you enjoy the excellent 2D game Cyberbots? Well, if you did, you should adore this. Pick your giant robot and wreck your competition. You're gonna need some practice though, because this plays nothing like most of the Capcom fighters you are used to. To jump, you have to use a button. To block, you have to use a button. There are items you have to keep track of, and there are only 2 attack buttons. That means when you take control, everything feels wrong, and you'll need a match or 3 to really understand how to play it. The nice thing is that everything feels great once you get used to it. Fast, responsive, and loaded with great eye candy and special effects. I really dig the environments you fight in and the characters. It's sort of an amalgamation of many of the popular Japanese mech IPs, and each one has its own story. We didn't often get Capcom branching out and trying new styles of play back then, but Techromancer is different enough in both presentation and gameplay to warrant a look. There was a second updated release for this in Japan that added network versus play. In February of 2000, Capcom released one of my very favorite games for the platform, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Developed as a joint venture between Capcom and Nextech, this was meant to be the direct sequel to Resident Evil 2, but due to a contract with Sony, could not be a part of the numbered Resident Evil series. It was their best-selling Dreamcast game at that time, moving over 1 million units in its run, and the very first Dreamcast game to surpass 500,000 units sold. Once again, you are Claire Redfield, wrapped up in yet another one of Umbrella Corporation's shenanigans. This time you are taken prisoner and must escape an island full of the undead and bioweapons. You'll meet Leonardo DiCaprio and a cross-dressing madman along the way, and even get to play as Chris Redfield again from the first game. It does stay true to the tank controls that define these games early on, but adds some cool variety in the dynamic camera angles you play against. Whereas the camera was always stationary before, it will sometimes move and follow you here, creating a great sense of 3D in the environments. The story is pure Resident Evil insanity, and the adventure is rather long, so there is plenty of time to invest here. It was and still is a great looking game, full of awesome lighting effects and play areas filled with little touches like bugs scurrying about, rain, and radically different locations from where you start and where you end up. There are 3 different releases of this for the Dreamcast. The original release that came out in multiple regions, a limited edition that came with a special slipcover in Japan only, and a final release called Biohazard Code Veronica Complete that was also exclusive to Japan. That version saw a few changes to the story, appearances of the characters, and has an easy mode, and was known as Resident Evil Code Veronica X on other platforms. That ends part 1 of Capcom and the Sega Dreamcast. The takeaway from this episode is that Capcom had a hell of a first year on the platform, releasing many must-own games. There is honestly not a stinker here, and even the weakest release, Giga Wing, was still a really good shoot-'em-up. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that the majority of these games use the VGA box for the Dreamcast, a great way to boost your image quality over the standard composite or S-video cables. Having imported the Dreamcast from Japan, these games were pivotal to my enjoyment of the system in those early days. Many of them took months to come west, and having access to them early just made Dreamcast ownership all that much more special to me. The incredible thing is that even as good as these games were, you'd think Capcom had nowhere to go but down, but as you'll see in part 2, they just kept releasing must-own software. Their output made the Dreamcast what it was for many people, and it's easy to see why. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.